Okay, great. The recording has started. I would like to thank you all to be there for an extra lecture on a Sunday morning. I was planning to finish off the syllabus as early as possible because I believe your exams would start are somewhere in the first week of July. So you have ample amount of time to respond to, and of course you have your assignments to complete. So I wanted to give you significant amount of time. And as a consequence, I thought that I need to request you to let us see if we can have an extra lecture. Having said that, let us just check what we were supposed to be doing, how much we have done about it. And okay, I've pinned it. I hope you all are able to see the screen I'm sharing. Okay. Uh, we started with the introduction to human geography. We spoke about the scope, how and what are the different types of branches, important branches of human geography. And then we spoke about contemporary issues. So you will realize we have been speaking all throughout. Contemporary issues are day to day around what is happening with that particular subject in day-to-day life. Then we shifted to population, and we spoke about the distribution of population, the theory. In fact, you had only the demographic transition model. We did the theory, Malthusian theory as well. We saw the factors affecting distribution of population, the growth and distribution of population in the world. We spoke about population in India also. And a concerned topic was settlements. We are into settlements, the last part of it, I would rather say. And we would be going into, we have done the types of settlements, the rural and the urban. And I said that it's basically the scale to the normal human eye, which is there as far as settlement is concerned. Modern concepts in settlement, we are yet to come to that as such. Uh, Urban sprawl, satellite towns, rural and urban fringe. I would say there is a subtle difference between these three concepts as such. The other day I said that the rural urban fringe is basically those areas along the fringe regions of an urban area which have taken up some characteristics of the urban areas, and at the same time are maintaining a few characteristics of the rural areas as well. You'll have a farm here and there, and you have farming machines here and there in that particular area. At the same time, you will have a couple of societies coming up. I would say that those who come from the Pune Nagar road side, of course, you'll have it everywhere, but I could say that beyond Waguli, nowadays you'll see that I forget the name of the place, but beyond Waguli, you have these parallel things in the sense small sheds, large housing societies at the same time, a patch of farm here and there. So that's a characteristic feature of rural-urban fringe. As far as urban sprawl is concerned, I would say the word itself suggests that the urban area is pushing itself into its surrounding areas. Now, it necessarily does not have to be a rural area every time. It could be an open barren area also. But you'll see that it is not, as far as services is concerned, as far as development is concerned, it would not be as perfect as the central parts of that particular urban area. Satellite towns, I would say, there was a time wherein Pimpri Chinchwad was called as a satellite town of Pune. Secunderabad was called as a satellite town of Hyderabad. It's basically two related areas, but one of them happens to be larger, and people from the satellite town are dependent, and that's why the term comes satellites. Okay, you'll see that satellites are dependent on planets in the celestial sense of it. So to say, you will see that satellite towns are significantly dependent, I would say, as far as on the major cities are concerned as such. Coming to the urbanization in India, with special reference to Maharashtra, I would say that in recent times, particularly after 1971, there has been a significant growth in the increase of urbanization, and that's basically because of employment opportunities available in the urban areas, and I would say problems in getting employment as far as rural areas are concerned. And again, if you remember that the growth of population has been significantly large. So in rural areas, you were not left with much employment opportunities. So hordes of people started moving into employment into the urban areas. Governments were investing, and in fact, I'm going to speak about the role of government as far as shaping up of the general uh, structure of urban as well as rural aspects in India as well as in Maharashtra. Interestingly enough, you'll see that if we see at the whole scenario, India-based scenario historically, you'll see that till the arrival of the Britishers, you'll see that we did not have a distinct difference between an urban area and a rural area in the Indian context as such. In fact, I remember reading somewhere that till around 500, 600 years ago, even places like Delhi, etc., did not look like separate, say, or elite towns, etc. These were overgrown villages, to so to say, with the palaces of the rulers in certain areas as such. Okay, and that was the scenario in various parts. It was the Britishers when they came in that they brought in a few things uh, which necessarily to be uh, had to change the face of urban parts of India, particularly as such. Uh, what could those be? If we just try to think about it, what did the Britishers bring about? We'll see that they brought in industrialization. We'll see that the Britishers wanted their resources to be transported from one region to the other at a faster pace and at a massive scale. And that's in fact a characteristic of industrialization. We will go into the detail of that when we speak about industry in the next topic in say possibly by the next lecture, because I plan to finish it off by Thursday, next Thursday, if not today. Surely will not finish it today because we are still in settlements. So you'll see that the Britishers brought in, they required administration. So administrative offices was something that the Britishers brought in. What were they to administer? They were supposed to administer various units of administration that the Britishers brought in the sense. You'll see that it's because of that that railway colonies came up. You see all around places which have a dense network or a major railway station as such. You'll have railway colonies. We speak about Pune. I don't know how many of you all have know this, but you'll see that at Pune station you have a place near Pune station you have a place called as Tadiwala Road, and Tadiwala Road has a significant railway colony. You go further down to Ghorpadi. Ghorpadi has a railway settlement as such, and in fact, at every railway station you have a small railway colony as such. Shivaji Nagar, Khadki, and I would say Pimpri, because the staff needs to be there around, and that's why they have made a provision. The other day I said that another significant feature of India being that the structure of railway stations looks to be the same in major parts as such. So all the way till Dehu Road, and then you'll see you have colonies around Lonavala railway station also. So that was a major change that was brought about. Then you'll see that certain concrete seats of power, as far as, or I would say, cities, or so to say, the towns of power of the Britishers. The Britishers made it a point that when they constructed their uh, administrative buildings and institutions as such, they built it in a very lavish style as such. Remember, the Britishers came in from an island country, and India was a very expansive country for them. So you'll see that construction of British monuments tends to be very, very grand as such. Okay, and they used excellent architecture, and the best of the architecture was put in. Say, for example, in Mumbai, you have many, say, all along the uh, prior coastline. Now, why I'm saying prior coastline of southern Mumbai is because what you see as Marine Drive today is not something that was there at a point of time. It was all sea. Actually, I don't know how many of you all know the topography and the uh, say the expanse of southern part of Mumbai particularly, but you may have heard about the Azad Maidan, which is a very popular place as far as political agitations, etc., is concerned. Azad Maidan is also known for its cricket. There were other Maidans which are called as the Cross Maidan, and then you have the Kuparit ground. So you'll see that this string of so-called Maidans today actually was the original coastline, and the major institutions backing them. You'll see that the High Court building, the Elphinstone College, the Institute of Science, the Mumbai University building. All of these were once upon a time directly facing the sea, I would say. It's only, I don't remember the actual place, but then they reclaimed all these, and then you have that string of houses that came along what is now called as the Marine Drive. Marine Drive, again, let me remind you, is not something that is natural. It was under the sea. It is built on reclaimed land. You'll see that reclamation is still continuing towards the southern part of Mumbai, southern end of Mumbai. So that's something. And you'll see that similar things happened in the other day we spoke about New Delhi also. You'll see that once, I think in 1909, the British capital shifted from Kolkata to Delhi, and they required huge amount of space for administration. So comes up these various buildings, and you'll see that British architecture is so very distinct. Okay, so to say. So that's another characteristic feature. The same thing happens in Kolkata also. So that's an important point that we need to note as far as urban locations in India are concerned. Wherever the Britishers had some establishments, you'll see that you will definitely find uh, remnants of British architecture, which are in use today, I would say. As far as Delhi is concerned, it's a unique place basically because being more or less centrally located, it had been raided and re-raided by different dynasties, and different dynasties have their impact on Delhi as such. So before the Britishers, you'll have a Mughal impact on say the expanse of Delhi and so on and so forth. So that's about urban areas as such. Rural areas were, you'll see that today, I would say 2 out of 3 people, even today, 2 out of 3 people live in rural areas of Maharashtra, and India as well. And I would not be able to throw much light on rural areas of India, but the changing face of rural areas in Maharashtra is basically because the governments are investing, so, respective governments, and of course I would say subsequent governments also have been investing a lot of things in various schemes as such. So irrigation is something which is being pushed up in rural areas of Maharashtra. Then I would say that another thing that you would see is that concretization of main roads in the rural parts of Maharashtra is again something that it's it's just one road that passes through a village as such, but then of late many of these roads have been concretized as such. Concretization also has been on the agenda in the urban areas, basically because tar roads require a lot of maintenance. Not that concrete roads do not, but then fairly enough, you'll see that concrete roads stay fit for a longer time, particularly compared to the tar roads as such. Then you'll see that as far as Indian urban areas further are concerned, they are attracting population for employment and other purposes. So they have grown. Requirements of in larger of the urban areas, I would rather say, we could say the so-called million cities is cities having population of 10 lakh plus. So this concept of million cities, by the way, came back in the census of 1971. We had only 4 cities which had a population of million plus then. However, today I believe last census itself it was 54 cities having a population of 10 million plus, and in fact it would be much larger. Another 10-15 easily added in the last 10 years, and that's why I always say that it's time that we move ahead and we have a classification called as 10 million cities as such, in the sense uh, cities having a population of 10 million or 1 crore and beyond as such. Okay? What was true in 71 as million cities is true as 10 million or 1 crore cities today. You will see that you have these 4 major metropolitans in India, uh, um, particularly Mumbai, Delhi, and Kolkata having a population of 1 crore plus. I doubt if Chennai has crossed the population of 1 crore, and that's why I'm a bit skeptical about it. But it is 90 lakhs plus for sure. So that's about say the urbanization and of course the rural growth or the rural structure of India as such. These are very superficial highlighting points, but many of us tend to forget them, and that's why I made it a point to repeat them as such. And then we need to move to the next topic, that's economic geography, uh, in which we are going to do economic activities of man. We're going to do 2 major activities of them, and then we are going to go into a few the factors affecting agriculture and industry, and then we are going to go into the contemporary issues of MIDC, SEZs, IT industry. That's more related to industry as such. Okay, uh, so let us move ahead and identify the economic activities. Now, as far as economic activities are concerned, before that, I would just again like to throw some light on human geography. We've done this. Remind you that we have done 2 topics does not mean we have done all in human geography. I always tell students who would be taking up geography that there is a lot of geography beyond your syllabus, just like there is a lot of any subject beyond your syllabus. You are just at FY level, and even and at S1 and T1 level should not see you through all the topics of your subject. You'll have to go in for extra readings as such. Economic geography is something related to the economics, the money aspect of it. So you'll see that right from geography, geography in agricultural geography, which is at time called as nutritional geography, industry, transport, resource geography, and geography of development. In the sense, investments made by governments in respective sectors as such. Say, for example, infrastructure is something that has been significantly invested for in the last 2.5 decades in India as such. Transportation infrastructure, particularly the Golden Quadrilateral project and the say the north-south and the east-west corridors, okay, the expansion of this and so on and so on. When we speak about economic geography, we would be speaking about, sorry, economic activities also. Economic activities also. We require to divide economic activities in two major aspects as such. Okay, you'll see that economic activities which are related to production and economic activities, I would say, which are related to services, service provision as such. And on that basis, you see that you see this earlier also that we have classified economic activities of man into primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and quinary. Okay, we'll speak about this today, and we'll keep the rest of the things for the next lecture, possibly the last lecture. Okay, so when I say production, I have two of these activities in this. I have the primary activity, I have the secondary activity as such. And services are tertiary and quaternary. As far as quinary activities are concerned, uh, yes, this is an economic activity. This is a service activity as well, but has been added to the list of economic activities of late. And in fact, it's added late basically because the development, it's very similar to the fifth stage of demographic transition model, I would say, that earlier it was not viewed that we would have a requirement of such a type as. Let us go into trying to understand each of these activities one by one. And the best source, now keep in mind, economic activities, two parts, production. In all these economic activities, you're going to produce something. And in these two activities, these activities will include all those activities which provide a service. You will get to know this in detail once we discuss each of them. Okay, and eventually we discuss this also. Okay, so I have kept this as a baseline for understanding our activities, economic activities, as far as man is concerned. Now, of this, I will start with primary activities. Now, why is it called as a primary activity? Prime first. Now, as an economic activity, what activities would be primary? How do you think of them? Okay, activities which are related to nature are going to be primary activities as such. You are extracting some resource for which you are going to charge money, but it is related to nature. So, of this list, I would say hunting. Sorry, no, I don't know. Okay, I'll do it this way: hunting. Okay, fishing, herding, farming, lumbering, and mining. Okay, these are the list of activities wherein you are in direct contact with the nature, and because you are in direct contact with the nature, okay, the products, okay, Hunting, I would say, is nowadays banned to quite an extent, but I don't know. See, it's an irony that hunting of animals is banned, wild animals, but then killing of fish is fine for you. It's an economic activity for you. Okay, killing of chicken is fine for you. Okay, killing of cattle for beef is fine for you. So, what I mean to say is, ironically, a human being is a very selfish animal, and is going to divide things and explain it to himself and his society as per his convenience. Yes. You hunt and don't hunt some people, some animals, and you restrict hunting of other animals, and so on and so forth. And you always have that explanation of environmental concern, ecosystems, what systemic pyramids, and maintenance of sustainability levels, and so on and so forth. I'm not against it. It's basically a thought process of how economics plays a dominant role in dividing all these things. Herding is again something you rear cattle for cattle products, and so on and so forth. Agriculture is something here written as farming. Agriculture is again something which is indirect, an activity which happens in direct contact with the nature. Cultivating the soil for and lumbering is extraction of wood from the forests. Okay? And lastly, mining. Now, all of these, as we have said, are called as primary activities. Now, it so happens that in most of the cases, okay, you will see that the products which are extracted out of these activities are not fit to be consumed directly. What does that mean? That they need some processing. Okay, this processing would be done under this activity here, that is manufacturing, and that is called as the secondary activity. These all are primary activities. This is the secondary activity. For manufacturing, you would be requiring the help of machines. And as far as just a moment, what was I doing? No, sorry. Okay, and this mechanization is very important as far as the secondary activity is concerned. Not all products, I would say, are not fit for direct consumption, but majority of the products are not fit for direct consumption. So you have to process them, you have to remold them so that they can be consumed at the end. And in that case, you require the help of machines. So all that activity, economic activity, which is now related to machines, you'll see that the primary activity was related to natural aspects. Now we come to the secondary thing, wherein it's all going to be related to machines. An output of any machine is going to be called as, or anybody working around machines is going to be called as working as in secondary activities as such. Now there are a lot of um, uh, differences as far as people associated with machines are concerned. I'm purposely not going to tell you what those differences are. While I keep explaining the various economic activities, I want you all to identify what would be the line of separation of people in a particular activity and the other. I'll of course be giving you hints at times, but I want you to purposely locate what I am actually trying to indicate at. Now, let us assume that some primary activity, some primary products can be consumed. One. Let us assume that some primary products need further processing. Two. So these go for processing, and you have them in your factories, etc. But how are you going to have them? Okay, you'll have to transport them. Okay, so there comes the role of the third activity, and that's called as service. Okay, this means of transportation, and of course I would add trade to that. Trade and transport together is going to be your tertiary activity. Now, what exactly does all this mean? We'll see that all means of transport will help you to either uh, transfer goods, or it will help you to transfer human beings. Now, is transfer of human beings an economic activity? Yes. Okay, you'll see that man is also a resource. As a consequence, transfer of human beings also will be an economic activity. It would be at a public level, it could be at a private level, but all means of transport. Similarly, you'll see that we also need to understand that products need to move from the areas where you find raw materials. You gather these raw materials in industries. You now have a final product which is ready, that also needs to move. Okay, unless and until a product is able to move, why I'm giving an logic to why tertiary economic activities become important. You'll see that all this is done on an economic basis. Okay, the basis of economics, always, I'm not an expert in economics, but what I understand is that the basis of economics is that a particular place is going to have a surplus of a particular commodity, and a particular place needs to have a deficit of a particular uh, commodity. Now, a commodity where it is found in surplus is obviously not going to have that much of value, because there is not going to be demand. And again, another word of from economics that we are going to borrow temporarily. And the area of deficit, uh, and on the same time, you'll see that unless and until you transfer the surplus, okay, through supply chains to areas of deficit, trade will not take place. Okay, so commodities are valued only because of the fact that you pose a demand for a particular commodity. Yes, some students who have already planned for specialization in economics would say, "Sir, what about purchasing capacity and so on and so forth?" Obviously, purchasing capacity needs to be there, but that would not be my cup of coffee, as far as uh, our topic in concern is our topic in discussion is concerned. So I would not go into the other parameters of economics. What I understand is surplus and deficit areas. And deficit areas are going to create a demand, and surplus areas are going to create a supply. The more steep the curve between demand and supply is going to be leading to a higher appreciated value as far as that particular commodity is concerned. That is one thing about it. And then there is something like giving. If you have read about Adam Smith's theory of trade as such, okay, that's about communication, the requirement of it. And then if you go into the details of origin and expansion of trade, what is interesting to note is that what do you trade actually? Yes, surplus, demand, supply, surplus, deficit are some basic things around which economics works. But is it that, okay, I have surplus and I keep sending it in different directions, and I earn? No. You'll see that there is also called as the sending a particular commodity to the right place and making it available at the right time, or making a commodity available at the right place and at the right time as such. Okay, so you'll see that as far as we are now into the rainy season as such, and Punjab gets a bumper crop of, or the woolen textiles in Punjab, they have created a lot of woolen textiles this year. Okay, it's not that in June, July that they would be sending it to different parts of the country, which is actually under the monsoon cover today. So, if you're going to send woolen textiles into different parts, there is going to be no demand for it. Though there is a supply of it, there is going to be no demand and the market will crash. So what do you opt for? You're going to opt for, say trade of umbrellas, jackets, raincoats, etc. So what is required at what time at a particular place also decides, okay, the value of that particular commodity, and that is dependent on trade and transport as such. Okay, as far as transport is concerned, we all know that I'll not go into the details of modes of transport, etc., etc. But and of course, we have learned this at an earlier point also, which are the flexible means of transport, which are say the costlier means of transport, and which are say besides being costly, it also you'll see that the security of resources is going to be equally important. You'll see that you can transfer iron ore, you can transfer coal, you can transfer cement by railway as such, but you can't transfer gold by uh, railways, isn't it? Or you would require a very high level of security, which is not necessarily required for bulky commodities as such. So all this thought will come under the tertiary activity, and people associated with transport and trade activities will be classified under it's a service, right? You are neither producing anything, you are neither manufacturing anything. What you have done is produce a product in an area of production. It could be natural or it could be a manufactured product as such. You are you say you are waiting for the right time and the right place so that you can extract maximum benefit or profits out of it. And to get that, you will see that you are selecting a particular means of transport. Both trade and transport happen to be services. Okay, it's not manufacturing anything, it's not producing anything, and that's why it would come under the second category. That's the service sector as such. So tertiary, and you'll see that it's only these things, everything related to services. Okay, that's helping this way. Transferring commodities is going to be classified as a tertiary activity. Now, whether advertising would come under this, whether marketing would come under this, whether salesmanship would come under this is a question. As I said, I am going to leave you with a few queries which will be answered at a later date. But you can need to think about that. What exactly does advertising, salesmanship, marketing, what role does the banking is another thing, okay, that could be classified under tertiary. Whether to classify this under tertiary is something which is which is food for thought, I would rather say, for students at FY level. So I want you all to think in detail about these things. And as you start thinking about this, we take up the fourth of these economic activities as such. Okay, and as far as this economic fourth activity is concerned, I would say I am not able to place it here, but I would say it because it's there literally everywhere. It's there literally everywhere. I would say that as far as for the fourth activity, or what is called as the quaternary activity is concerned, this is something related to services, okay, but these are professional services. Okay, now here is again where the trick comes as such. We call them as professional services basically because you are not actually, you may be responsible for transfer of trade, transfer of commodities, transport, and trade around it as such, but then you are not directly involved in this. Now, what are the examples of people who are associated in quaternary activity? One example is in right in front of you, your teacher, okay, your professor is belonging to this particular category as such. Okay, I am not involved in primary activities, certainly. I'm not involved in secondary activities, certainly. I'm not involved in tertiary activities. Okay, but you'll see that I teach agricultural geography, I teach industrial geography, I teach trade, I teach transport. So I am I am professionally qualified to teach these things. I may not be involved, but I read about this and then I pass information about this to other sections of the society. As okay, I'm professionally skilled for that. That includes communication skills, reading, and of course, it also includes some basic standards which are set up by, say, the governing institutions. In the sense, if you want to become a professor, you need to either clear the net set examinations, or you need to be a PhD in that particular subject as such. So you'll see that you need to gain a basic level of competence for that particular thing. The same thing goes for a doctor as such. Another example of a professional service as such. Having said that, you'll see that nowadays, with the WhatsApp University and the Google Universal University as such, nowadays people risk a lot of medical treatment by just looking into Google. Okay, they'll check for the chemical components of a particular thing. So they'll have a small cough, or they'll have a cold, and they would say that this is just at a very small scale, so let me not visit the doctor. You'll either go to the say the pharmacy shop, and you'll ask for a few tablets for this and that, and then you might check it on Google, the chemical components. Some more conscious people would look for the side effects of those tablets as such. But then you'll see that doctors are professionally qualified for it. And in fact, nowadays you'll see that being an MBBS is not enough. You in fact see, and that serves our purpose also. Okay, what is professionality as such? Okay, you'll see that MBBS doctors go in for further studies. That's MD as such, and you'll have an MD pathology, you'll have MD medicine, you'll have an MD general practitioner. Okay, you'll have an MD radiologist. So you'll see that it's all these doctors are, what are they concentrating at? They're concentrating at at the human body. Okay, but nowadays you will have specialization. You will have an ENT specialization. You will have a pediatrician. You will have an ophthalmologist. You will have a gastric surgeon. You will have a cardiologist. You will have a person. What's that person called? In sugar, an expert in diabetic consultation. Then you'll have people who are orthopedics and so on and so forth. The other day I was explaining it to some small kids as to what exactly is the difference as far as these specializations as far as doctors are concerned. I said that the human body is just like a huge mall, and you have these multiple shops in these malls as such. These shops are nothing but these specializations as such. These are compartments. You see that normally an ENT would not look into your dental treatment. A dental treatment would not look into your thyroid. A person looking into thyroid would not look into your digestive problems and so on and so forth. They would have an idea. They will give you that, okay, you go to this particular person, you give you a list of doctors as such, but it does not happen. And that's a profession. Then I would say that another profession is lawyer, because unless and until you are qualified to be a lawyer, you can't argue a case for a particular name. So I hope you are understanding what I actually mean when I'm saying professional services as such. Now, just to say on a lighter note, I would say that nowadays being in politics also is becoming very popular. Now, whether we should be placing it under professional skills or not is something that I would again throw open this topic for discussion as such. Now, having looked upon these four major services, and let me tell you that till the point I was in college, and till the point that I actually started teaching geography for say nearly a decade after the 1990s, the fifth type of activities were not there. It's very recently, a decade and a half, that the quinary activities have been added to the list of economic activities, basically because it so happens that off late there are so many things that are coming up at a higher professional level, I'd say. Okay, the IT industry is an example of it. You'll see that managers and professionals at a very high level, I would say IS officers, etc., they are taking decisions at a massive scale for a large number of commodities or individuals, populations, and so on and so forth. So, at quinary activities, are people involved in such very high level planning, decision making, and so on and so forth. You'll see that again, this could be a point to be debated that in that case, the decision of lockdown was a very high level decision. In that case, do politicians classify as in quinary activities? No, they do not classify because politics is hierarchical. Let me tell you, from particularly in India, from central level to the state level to the gram panchayat level, and so on and so forth. And even you'll see that the decision of lockdown is not something that an individual has taken, though announced by an individual. You'll see that there are a lot of expert things, and I would say these experts in literally everything, say controlling, say the pandemic and trying to control the pandemic, making resources available at the time of some natural disaster, other natural disasters like cyclones, etc. As such, okay, is all those aspects in which I would say people associated with quinary activities are related to when you are taking decisions which could impact millions and millions of people. Okay, and of course that is institutionalized. Institutionalized. You would say that okay, I will drop a bomb somewhere. That's not a quinary activity as such. Okay, that's a terrorist activity by the way. Okay, now I would leave you with a few questions as I've just also posed a question that where would you put politics as such? Because that's an interesting thing. Then you'll see that a shop floor engineer, otherwise engineering is a professional service. Now, how can you also classify him? Because the engineer will be working in a shop floor in an industry. Would you be classifying an engineer as a secondary activist or a quaternary activist? Is something that I would leave you to think about, and let us see if we can find answers for the same when we meet the next time. As so, this was a discussion on the basic primary activities, economic activities of human beings, divided into on a larger scale in two sections: the productive sector and the service sector. The productive sector includes production of natural commodities, that's primary activities, and then processed and manufactured commodities, that's secondary activity. Transferring these commodities, may it be natural, processed, and finished goods as such. Okay, say providing service for the transfer is going to be classified under tertiary activity, which is a service sector. As such, trade and transport activities would come under that. Here again, I have placed two questions to think about: marketing and salesmanship and advertisements and so on and so forth as such. And then we go to that sector of service which is not related to any of these three, but is more professional, and you require basic qualifications to practice these professions as such, and that's why these are called as quaternary. And the last of the services, which is at a very high scale of management, is called as a quinary. Are people involved in quinary activities as such? So I'll stop here for the day, and I'll return back uh, to our points of discussion. If you have any queries, you could just unmute yourself and ask your questions on anything that we have done today, or you think about asking a question otherwise as well. I hope you are near finishing your assignments as such, and you have already started submitting your assignments. Very soon you'll get your marks as far as your internal exams were concerned, and we'll combine those marks with your assignment marks just like we did in semester 1, and I'll put up the list of marks that you have received respectively very soon on the WhatsApp group. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can just ask those questions. Well, if you don't have your questions, why are you waiting? Leave the meeting. Enjoy your Sunday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.